Hey everyone, Scott here, and today Bandai have posted the update to the ban list. This is going to go into effect on the 6th of August, all these changes here, the bans, the limits and the erratas. They posted this image to their Facebook page to kind of give an overview of what is getting banned, limited or errated. So I thought in this video I would go over these changes and maybe give my thoughts on them, whether they're the correct changes or not. So yeah, let's just jump straight into it. So I was surprised to see both Beerus and Pan on here. These aren't two cards that necessarily were top of mind of like things that needed to be banned. But with the explanations they've given for both of them, they kind of make sense as to why they've been banned. Particularly the Beerus. I mean, I'd always seen this as like a card they intended to be basically an anti-hand destruction card. Something you would maybe have in your sideboard and bring in to kind of counter hand destruction. Basically say to your opponent, okay, you're going to rip a card from a hand, but it's going to come straight into play from the drop area. But the way the card has turned out is people just would use it for their own discard effects. They would discard this to bring it into play, which again, I don't think that's the way Bandai intended it to be used. Maybe they could have just errated it so it was only your opponent's discard effects that made it come into play. But I guess they've decided to just go and straight out ban it. I don't think there's going to be any decks that are like completely killed for the fact that Beerus is now on the ban list, but nevertheless it's in line with what they're trying to do, or their stated goal for the ban list updates this time is to kind of curb free plays and the amount of like oppressive aggro in the format. So this is a step in that direction. The pan also makes sense when they give the reasoning of just it being used in combination with like the big triple strike, is it Sin Shenron? Or maybe it's an Omega Shenron, I can never remember which or which. But yeah, that ability to switch back to active mode, so now you've basically got a triple strike dual attack on the board. And with Sin being able to, in a lot of cases, awaken to life, meaning you can get pan out for free. I believe it was 2 or less, might be 3 or less now I'm thinking about it. But yeah, Sin can a lot of the time kind of wait and awaken a bit lower life than normal. I'm kind of surprised they didn't just errata it to only work with a Heartfelt Plea, like instead of a yellow battle card, just say choose one of your Son Goku or Heartfelt Plea, switch it to active mode. But I guess with Heartfelt Plea being limited to 1, that would have made this card pretty much useless at that point. So I guess banning it is fine. So then we have the rebooted Gohan. So this was already banned in best of 1, but now it's being banned in best of 3 as well, basically. I guess it makes sense because it's just such a different kind of deck to anything else, just going all in on their leader multiple times in a single turn. It kind of made a situation where if you didn't have the right deck to counter it in best of 1, you would just automatically lose. So the ban from best of 1 made sense. And I guess they've decided that even in best of 3, it was too much, even though you can sideboard against it. I guess at that point it becomes, do you find the cards you actually sideboarded in against it or not? But yeah, really the only way you could beat it is just hope you have a ton of negates in hand and you see them all early, and then you just let them use the active main, switch back to active mode, and then they lose the game at the end of the turn, and they basically just have to hope you don't have another negate in your hand. I mean, it's a bit of a shame that this is getting banned just because it is such an interesting kind of leader, especially with the fact that it has that skill that says at the end of the turn you lose the game. There's not really anything else like that in the game. I think it's just with the way the deck was built, there was a lot of cards that if they weren't going to ban the leader, there probably would have been like 5-6 more cards, either limited, errated, or on the ban list, just to try and bring the leader into kind of more of a reasonable state. And so I guess they've just decided, right, rather than ban all these other cards just so you can keep using the leader, just get rid of the leader, which makes sense. But yeah, the one last thing is hopefully this doesn't affect the way that Bandai kind of do reboot leaders in the future going forward, that they're not going to kind of hold back on how kind of powerful they make the reboot leaders, just because of this kind of one bad experience of kind of rebooting this leader and then making it too strong to where they have to ban it. Hopefully going forward the reboots will still be pretty good. The final card that they've added, and so the final card they've added to the ban list is Universe 9 Assemble. This is the first one that actually really hurts me, because to be honest I haven't really played with any of these cards, but I was using Universe 9 Assemble a lot in my Mecha Freezer deck. I'm kind of surprised it went straight to the ban list. I thought they might have tried to limit it down to one first, or even if they would have errated it in some way, maybe make it so you can only use it with like a Universe 9 leader or something. So either the original Big Ammo or the reboot Big Ammo. That I thought would have been a better alternative than outright banning it. But I kind of get why they're doing it. Like, in a lot of cases with Mecha Freezer, this was just like a free... I say free, you gotta take the life, but in a lot of cases like a free draw 2 and get a battle card, or even a draw 3 if you play the Basil off of it. Personally, if I was going to be in charge of how these cards were going to be kind of changed on this ban list, I probably wouldn't have banned it myself. I would have just errated it to, like I say, only work with Universe 9 leader, or just some other way of stopping it from being used with Mecha Freezer, like give it a permanent that says you can't play this card without paying its energy cost, something like that. And that way, if you're gonna pay 2 for it, you can at least, like, it's reasonable at 2. I think it becomes unreasonable when it's basically free in terms of energy, at least. So personally, that is not how I would have done it, but I guess maybe that's something I don't know about upcoming sets, that Bandai have decided to ban it, and it'll make more sense in the future. So then we have the limited list, and again, there's 4 cards added to that. First up is a Heartfelt Plea. With this being a card that only comes into play for free when you awaken, basically limiting it down to 1 just means that it's going to be that much harder to kind of find it. Obviously, with the way that it's auto actually worked, you couldn't get multiple copies into the battle area for free. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of decks just cut it down to the 1 copy and just keep running it. And if you see it, then great. If you don't, then fine. Just awaken without it. Like, I don't think the decks that run it are like entirely built around this card coming into play. The same way that some of the decks when the card first came out kind of were. There was like the Set 8 Baby deck, which basically built up the Baby chain into the, I believe it was the Great Ape that had like 30k power. And then they would KO it for Heartfelt Plea, and they would play a Pan Great Ape Whisper at the same time, and then they'd have the 2 triple strike attacks. A lot of the decks I think are running it now is just like even more pressure. It's not like the win condition necessarily in and of itself. Like I know in Dark Broly, I believe they were running it. You could KO the 7 cost red Broly to get this out for free when you awakened. But I think Dark Broly isn't going to be too badly damaged by this card being limited to 1. Like they'll still be able to run the 1 copy, and it was a good card in the deck, obviously, as like a 30k triple strike, but they already have so many like 30k cards that I don't think this is going to be the thing that necessarily nerfs the deck too much. I think it's going to be more the errata to the leader maybe is what does more damage than Heartfelt Plea being banned, or limited rather. But I don't anticipate it entirely disappearing from the meta. I think there will still be decks that will just run it in the hopes of seeing it. Next up we have Bardock the Resolute. And it was basically like a free double strike whenever your opponent either took a hit from a card with critical, or you did some kind of burn damage to them, it could come out for free. Kind of makes sense. Again, limiting it down to 1, it just makes it a bit more inconsistent in the deck. When people run it at 4, they would pretty much guarantee that they'd be able to see it in the early turns. So again, this one to me seems actually pretty reasonable. I think the decks that were already running it will still run the 1 copy and just hope they see it early, and I guess in those cases it frees up more space in the deck for other kind of degenerate cards. Because obviously this isn't a card that like entire decks are built around in the same way that maybe some of these other ones we've looked at are, or going to be looking at are. So whatever deck was run this card, if they have to run 1, 2, 3 less copies of it, they'll just go to whatever is the next best card that they can put in one of those slots. And if it's not too much of a step down, then the decks aren't really going to be that badly hurt by it. But if there is nothing else that they can kind of fill those positions with that are even slightly equivalent, that's when we'll see that this card being limited to 1 is a big hit to those decks. Just might be a bit too early to tell right at this moment. But I guess it fits with Bandai's kind of overall kind of statement that they were making along with the ban list of like trying to limit the number of free plays in the meta at the moment, just to kind of rein aggro in a bit. So it makes sense they would hit like the one that needs a red leader, that is red generally tends to be of the 4 like original colours the most aggressive. So it makes sense that they hit like their free play of these cards, because there was one in all the original colours. There was like a Gravy, a Poutine and a Xeno Goku as well. But it makes sense they hit the red one. And then we have Bergamo Ferocious Roar, and this is another one that hit me personally, because I recently, well, I say recently, a few months ago, I bought 2 copies to go in my Mecha Freezer deck, so now one of those copies is kind of useless. I had actually been considering buying even another copy to go in the Freezer deck, and now I'm glad that I didn't, because that would have been a real ball ache if I'd bought either 1 or 2 more copies and then it got limited, so I'm glad I waited. Yeah, this card generally was just, like from my perspective playing it in the Mecha Freezer deck, it was like great because you could so easily shut down your opponent's turns by like switching, like you would use say a negate like Nimbus, switch one of their battle cards to rest mode with the leader, and then that triggers Bergamo. You can play it and he targets energy as well as battle cards, so you could often in a lot of cases tap your opponent out, and then that would bring Universe 9 Assemble online, or you could just tap your opponent down to like 1 energy, and then a lot of decks there's not a lot they can do with like a single energy open. So yeah, it was a really strong card in the Mecha Freezer deck. Limiting it down to 1, I'm still going to run the 1 copy in Mecha Freezer, obviously. Because really, when you play it, like you pay 2 energy, but then you could tap down 2 of your opponent's energy. So it's like you're going 1 for 1 and getting basically like a free 20k body on the board at that point. Like your opponent's losing as much energy as you are, so that kind of evens out. And that's part of what made it so strong. Also the fact that it ignored barrier, because there was a lot of stuff in the Mecha Freezer deck. A lot of, just in general, in yellow actually, there's not too many cards that let you switch things to rest mode ignoring barrier. So it was really useful for that case, if because in mono yellow again, there's not a lot of ways of like KOing cards ignoring barrier either. Like generally yellow doesn't have a ton of KO effects really, but they have even fewer that ignore barrier, and so a lot of the time if your opponent was playing a deck where they have something really annoying on the board with barrier, this would basically be your best way of getting rid of it. You would play it, switch it to rest mode, then attack into it. So this is a real big hit to actually a lot of yellow decks. I know it's more than just Mecha Freezer that was running this. And it does it in a way that I guess is kind of on theme, like limiting the amount of ways that yellow has of dealing with barrier. It's not a colour that's known for dealing with barrier very well. So in that sense, it kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it removes like a really good tool that yellow had. Whether these 2 kind of changes on their own will be enough to kind of nerf Mecha Freezer to a point where it's like a bit more reasonable, kind of has to wait to be seen. Already seen people talking about alternatives to Universe 9 Assemble. There's not really an alternative to Bergamo, but at least you can still run the 1 copy, so you will still see it in some matchups. I guess I should point out that I think Bandai have been pretty true to their word in this being kind of a wide-ranging ban list. I think they use that phrase a few times when referring to it. There's definitely a lot of different decks you can see that are being hit here with these bans and even the erratas. So like King King Piccolo's another one. Here with the drum being limited to 1. Really limiting this to 1, like, reduces, like, King Piccolo's survivability a bit, I guess, with it being a blocker. Also kind of reduces King Piccolo's ability to kind of remove cards by, now you only have 1 drum to minus something by 10k. A lot of the time they would drop that 10k minus onto something that had 10k power to kill it. So I did see some people saying that unique would have made more sense than limiting it to 1. I guess giving it unique would have just meant that as soon as you block with 1, you can play another one. And I assume Bandai didn't like the idea of that being the case. Assuming your opponent attack was something 20k or more, you could block with a drum and combo with another one. And then at the end of the battle, the drum that was in the battle area would get KO'd, and then you would play the one that you just comboed with. So maybe that was too much of an issue for Bandai and they just wanted to basically reduce the consistency. That's all that limiting does, is it reduces the consistency. It reduces your ability to find the card in every game. Really the case that limiting most affects a deck is when you would use multiple copies of the cards. In most games, like Bergamo, if you only ever used it once in a game on average, then limiting it to 1 isn't a massive deal. Same with drum here. I assume, I haven't played too much King Piccolo, or even against King Piccolo too much. I assume they used multiple drums in most games, so this will be a hit to that deck, I assume. So I guess with the way Bandai have kind of explained it, does make sense, this being banned. And then the last category we have is erratas, and we can see here what has been errated, but it doesn't actually show what the changes are. So I'm going to switch over to this other image that Bandai posted, which actually explains what the erratas are. So first up we have Xenocell, and basically all they've done here is move quadruple strike from being like innately on the card as keyword skill to being part of the auto. So now before turn 5, if you want to play Xenocell for free off of Successor, obviously you're not going to pay 12 for him, it'll just be like a 40k body. It's only once you have 5 or more energy that he becomes quadruple strike and dual attack, and rips those 3 cards from your opponent's hand. A lot of people, I think, saw this coming. A lot of people thought this probably would be the way that they would change it. It does make sense, because really, kind of in the same way that Reboot Gohan was, it's like you had to have the negate for Xenocell if your opponent was going to get down before turn 5, in a lot of cases. And usually they would play it after attacking you into you multiple times with other battle cards. And so in a lot of cases you did just have to sit there and maybe take some hits that you wouldn't normally, because you need to hold on to a negate for Xenocell. This change kind of helps a lot of decks out. Obviously the decks that aren't running Xenocell, it just means that you don't have to worry about him coming down till turn 5 at this point. I don't think there's going to be too many decks that will continue to run the card and play it before turn 5 necessarily, because really the thing you were getting him down for was that quad strike as kind of a really early kind of game ending swing. And I guess this is probably, for the people that own Xenocell, this is probably a better outcome than it being outright banned. At least it's still going to be playable in some decks, especially the ones that can very easily get to turn 5. So I'm thinking like Jiren would be an example. It's very easy for them to get to turn 5 with the fact that they're on their backside. They can just take 1 life to not take damage if they have Universe 11 out. It's very easy for them to get to turn 5, and they can quite easily, I think, fill up the board with a lot of Universe 11 guys to have the 12 for Successor. So I could still see it being run in decks like that, but there's maybe some others that were like super aggressive that aren't going to be able to wait to turn 5 to play this card, so they're going to have to maybe try and find a different secret rare to run in the deck. The one thing about this card, if you don't really care about having like a shiny version of it, I know it would be tempting now to try and pick up a copy while people are like panicking trying to sell theirs off, but if all you want it for is like the ability to play it in a deck, you don't really care, if it's super like fancy or anything, there's a possibility that if they do another revision pack, that they would include Xenocell in that, the same way they included like the Gotenks secret rare that was errated and the Gogeta secret rare that was errated in the first revision pack. So if they did a second one, Xenocell be in there, so you could potentially pick one up. A non-foil one, admittedly, but still you'll be able to pick one up very cheaply, if not just pull it from attending events. So that is the one thing to note. So next up we have Catastrophic Blow, which has been given a limit 1. This makes sense, again. I saw some people saying that this was just going to get straight up limited to 1. And kind of in the same way with the Cell, this I think is the lesser of the two kind of evils, I guess you would say, for the Invoker deck. Having it so you can only use it once per turn is better than just only having one copy in the deck. Does kind of kill off the Invoker deck, or at least the build that relies on Catastrophic Blow. Like, I know there are builds that rely more on the secret rare, but I guess for the people who can't afford that secret rare, with it being like thousands of dollars at this point, Catastrophic Blow, I guess, was like the alternative win condition for those decks. It getting limited to 1 does kind of suck for that deck, definitely. And like I say, it probably does kill it off in a big way. Because if this is once per turn, I believe the 6-drop Goku only also works once per turn. So you can do 2 damage per turn to your opponent from like turn 6 onwards. So in a lot of cases, that's going to be like a 2-turn kill, as opposed to where it is now, where they could do like 5 damage to you in a single turn, which I think was a bit much. There's a lot of cases, again, going back to like Reboot Gohan, it was a very specific kind of deck, and either your deck was able to deal with it or it wasn't. And in the situations where you weren't able to deal with it, it was just an auto loss. I know a lot of people who played the kind of Invoker deck were like, oh, it just puts you on a clock. It just means you've got to like be really aggressive and kill it early on. But I think that saying that was disregarding a lot of the strong defense that deck had. Like, it's very easy for them to say, oh, you just got to kill before turn 6. But if they're dropping like a topo every turn from like turn 2 onwards, it's kind of hard to kill them when they're doing that, or when they wipe the board with, I can't remember which card it is, I'll put it up on screen now, or ripping cards from your hand with the, well, I don't think they necessarily play that card, but yeah, they also had access to Dimension Magics. They'd like untap with their super combo, they'd Senzu Bean, they'd Royal Condemnation, so you try and play something big and it goes to the bottom of your deck instead. My experience of playing against the Catastrophic Blow build was you just needed to have a way of getting rid of their 3-drop Vegeta. If you could do that, then or if you could do it multiple times, because they may have more copies they could play. Really, it came down to, did your deck run barrier removal? If it did, you could win. If it didn't, you'd just basically auto lose. But the one thing to keep in mind is, obviously, now that this card has kind of been killed in the Invoker deck, it's very possible that going forward, Bandai could print something else that would be another win condition for the deck. So I don't think the deck is like 100% dead. Obviously, like I say, the versions that rely on the secret rare aren't dead necessarily off of this card being banned, but for the other ones, I wouldn't necessarily say to people, hey, get rid of all your Invoker cards, because they could very easily just give the deck another win condition in the future. They kind of did a similar thing with, they banned Violent Predator a few sets back. I think it was at the beginning of the Unison Warrior kind of series, and then when the Evolution Booster came out, they basically made another win condition for the Android 21 deck. Now that Violent Predator, which really was its win condition, had been removed from the game, they made that 17 and 18. That is like a win condition for the deck now. Still not back to where it kind of was before that ban, but at least it's kind of a playable deck again now. So we could see something like that with Invoker in the future. So next up, the next errata is to the Vegex leader. and basically on the front and back all they've done is made it so you're putting 3 cards in the drop area from your deck rather than 5. So this basically just makes it so it's a bit harder for the deck to hit the free plays on the early turns, and it also kind of limits them to their ability to fill up the drop for overwhelm as well, especially on those early turns. So like they were saying before about kind of limiting the amount of free plays in the meta at the moment, this is just a step in that direction for the Vejax deck. Obviously, similarly to a lot of these other erratas, it doesn't like outright kill the deck. It obviously does weaken it a bit, and obviously that's the intention of this errata, is to kind of weaken it. It's still, I think, going to be a strong deck going forward. It's just going to be a bit more inconsistent with getting those free plays off of the burst, or it's a bit harder for them to overwhelm now. But the deck will still be strong going forward, I think. And I suppose better than the alternative, which was like an outright ban, along with the Gohan reboot. So Vejax players, I guess, have that to be thankful for. At least they can still kind of play the deck. It's just going to be a bit more inconsistent. Like I say, it's a similar case with the Dark Broly leader. Basically, they've made it now so that you can only KO one of your own black battle cards with 30k power once per turn, whereas before it was you could do any number. Obviously, the immediate thing is it makes it a lot harder to go in with your leader, whereas before they could like KO 3-4 cards on the field to get like a 15-20k boost to their leader, and then they could drop like a Champa or a Kai on top of that, and now it's like a 40-ish double strike swing with their leader. Now the most they can go up to is like 20, and then they drop a Kai or a Champa and they're like 30 double, which is still like threatening, obviously. But the main thing this does is it stops them from removing their own Dark Broly's that have unique. That is a lot of what this kind of active battle was used for, is it allowed you to kind of, it allowed them to clear their own board to start playing the Broly's or the Dark Broly's again and get their like on-play autos for a second time. And I think especially because the Dark Broly's were able to be played from the drop, they could play the same ones over and over and over again. Whereas this kind of limits that down. Now they have to start to make a choice of like, okay, which is the most useful to replay at the moment, and then they have to just KO that one and then bring it back once each turn, as opposed to like getting 3 new Dark Broly's each turn. I know some people were saying that the Dark Broly leader, they were expecting it to get the same permanent as the Vejax up here of only being able to play mono black battle cards, just because of the way they were, or maybe not mono black but only play black battle cards. But I guess with them banning limiting Heartfelt Plea down to 1, that kind of also deals with this in a way. It would have made that permanent maybe a bit unnecessary to get. I mean, they have the red 7-drop, but that's also treated as black, which would have still been allowed if it was you can only play black battle cards, not mono black battle cards. So again, deck's not dead, obviously. It can keep going, it's just not going to be as aggressive or consistently aggressive, at least. So the next errata is to the margin quickening, and basically they made it so you have to have 3 or more energy to use it. I know from my kind of experience of playing against Margin Vegeta, they could quite often get this activated turn 2, I believe. Then that would let them get the 3-drop Boo out. They'd put the ball under it, go into the 4-drop Boo Zeno from the ultimate deck, and then they could play out often it was the 6-drop Zeno Slug, which is like a 25k triple strike that also stops your opponent attacking into your leader or something like that. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've used that slug. I can't exactly remember how the wording was. But yeah, so the next one up is Black Smoke Dragon, and basically now you need a Black Demon Realm race leader. They've said that this one is to stop with future interactions. So again, that's one thing that we again need to keep in mind with these erratas or bans or limits is Bandai obviously have more of an understanding of what's coming up than we do. So they potentially can see some things that aren't going to be obvious to us now, but might be in the future. As of right now, I don't know that anyone runs this with basically non-Metrocabra decks. This is quite obviously made for the Metrocabra deck with its ability to get Dark Dragon Balls from the deck into the draw. But like they say, it's to stop with upcoming interactions. So potentially maybe there's something coming like, hopefully what I would like to see is basically black equivalents to like Charismatic Villain or Dormant Potential. Maybe not with those exact skills obviously, but just like some black equivalents that need you to have a black unison in play. I think that's one of the things that a lot of black decks have been missing. And obviously I'd like that for the Metrocabra deck. The one kind of main weakness I feel the deck has is in the counterplays more so than the negates, but the counterplays, there's not really any good ones in mono black, so hopefully this is a sign that we're getting something like that. And so they're just limiting this to only be able to gain the marker once per turn if your leader's a black Demon Realm race. So if there's a card coming up that you need a black unison with 2 markers on it, I could see maybe people running this in other decks, play it down for 1, do the activate main, and then you have a 2 marker unison out. So similar to the way Demigra works in a lot of green decks, they can play it down turn 1, plus it, even if they're going first, just don't attack with it. And now Charismatic Villain is live on potentially your opponent's turn 1, or turn 2 at the latest. Could have maybe seen something similar with the Black Smoke Dragon in some black decks, so hopefully something like that is coming for Metrocabra specifically. I'd like to see it, but yeah, like they say, this is for future interactions, and the Errata on Videl is only really a small one to make it work the way it was intended to, so they've just given it, you have to choose a green unison in active mode and switch it to rest mode. Again, like I say, this is just to make it work the way they intended for it to work. So that's it in terms of what's on the banned, limited and errated list for the upcoming set. I believe this is going to come into effect, it's usually a few days before the set comes out, I believe is how it normally is, if not the day the set comes out. Or is it the day the pre-release happens? I can't remember off the top of my head, but these erratas and bans and limits will be coming soon, so a lot of people are going to be adjusting their decks going forward. Generally, like I say, with the way Bandai have explained a lot of these, they kind of make sense, especially with their like overall wanting to kind of curb aggro a bit. A lot of these things make sense in those terms. Also, with them kind of trying to limit these kind of outlier decks that you kind of need to have certain cards in your deck in order to be able to compete with them, with things like Catastrophic Blow or the Reboot Gohan. I think most of these changes are reasonable. There's a few that I maybe would not have done this way, but again, like I say, Bandai have info that we don't, so these could make a bit more sense in the future. So yeah, what do you think about these changes? Are these changes you would have made, or would you have done something different? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do it now. And if you could leave a like on the video, that really helps me out. And thanks for watching.